And what's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Still Curtain Podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com, and joining me, as always, is Still Curtain contributor Shayne Kubas. Shayne, yesterday, we learned that Russell Wilson had inked a one-year, $21 million deal with the New York Giants, taking him officially off the table for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And we're going to start with that. We're also going to talk about Aaron Rodgers and how this team has reached desperation mode at quarterback. It is kind of Rodgers or bust at this point. We're going to see what other options this team could explore. We're going to look at their pre-draft visits so far, and then we're going to cap off today's show with our first mock draft of 2025. We're going to do a what would we do mock draft this time before we dive into our predictive mocks moving forward here. So, Shayne, let's start with the Russell Wilson news today. It's big as it pertains to the Steelers. I didn't think Wilson was coming back. I think most fans had come to that conclusion already because the team had not expressed a lot of interest in him, despite what Art Rooney too might have said, despite what Omar Khan said in their early offseason comments. This team sounded like they wanted to retain either Justin Fields or Russell Wilson. Fields was the goal. It looked like they had a contract offer on the table for Fields. Wilson, not so much. It seemed like they were okay letting him walk. But now that Wilson is gone, Shayne, this really leaves the Steelers with one option at quarterback. And so Wilson's going over and joining Jameis Winston, who also signed he actually signed a 2-year contract. Same deal that Mason Rudolph got, by the way, the 2-year, $8 million contract with the Giants. They've got their quarterbacks now. They're not going after Aaron Rodgers. This was the last team in play for Rodgers because the Minnesota Vikings had pulled themselves out of the running, at least for now. Do you think that something's ultimately going to get done with Rodgers, Shayne, at this point?
I think the only thing left to figure out here, especially with Wilson now signing with the Giants, is does Aaron want to play football? Because if he does, who else is he going to play football for? Like, I don't think any other teams are going to come out of the woodwork. The Giants have already signed 2 veterans now with Winston and Wilson, which means they probably aren't taking quarterback at 3, but that's another conversation for another day. The Titans seem like they're going to be taking Cam Ward and moving on from Will Levis at this point. Like, so where does he play if it isn't with the Steelers? So that's where my frustration with this situation kind of comes from. And I've talked about it like in our chats that we have and other chats I have with people, is the decision to me has to be down to whether he just wants to play football or not, or whether he wants to play for the Steelers. Like, and if that decision isn't already made, like if he's still pondering that, it's probably, as much as it would hurt the Steelers theoretically, at least for this season, the decision should be made at this point. Like, if he's even thinking about retirement this much, he probably should just do it. Like, that's my issue with it. What version of him are you going to get? Like, is this going to be a guy that's truly bought in for one more year? Is this going to be a guy that's like, maybe it's week 6 and he's not feeling so hot, or maybe the team's not doing that great, he's going to regret coming back for another year? Like, I'm starting to wonder how much of that is at play here with this.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth mentioning for sure. And it makes you wonder, like, at this point, because the Steelers are supposedly the last team in this race, do they have leverage now? Can they go back and say, well, that contract that we offered you before, we're going to bring the number down a little bit? Or would that push him towards retirement if Pittsburgh were to do something like that?
Probably, yeah. So
I don't think that they would mess with that, obviously, but it's just an interesting situation. But Rodgers, in the same light, Rodgers knows how desperate this team is for a quarterback.
Yeah.
So, I mean, realistically, Shane, he could probably make this thing linger on as long as he wants. We're going to talk about if there is a deadline here to get Rodgers signed. I know that there's been whispers out there. But we'll table this discussion for just a moment. I probably should mention, too, that just today on Good Morning Football, Cam Hayward kind of issued a little bit of a redactment of his comments that he made about Rodgers. On the Not Just Football podcast, his own podcast. His co-host asked him essentially if you would go into a cave with Rodgers if it meant him coming to Pittsburgh. And more or less paraphrasing here, Hayward said, no, he's not going to beg to get Rodgers to come to Pittsburgh. Well, now it sounds like he is kind of giving an endorsement to Rodgers at this point. And Shane, what else can you do? Like, your options are you get to go with Mason Rudolph for 17 games, who was the Steelers' 3rd string quarterback 2 years ago. They didn't have any interest in bringing back to the team. Or it's Rodgers, who you hope can kind of just come back to form at least a little bit of what he was 3-4 years ago. And so that's pretty much what they're left with right now. Shane, I want to talk really quickly before we dive into Rodgers more here. Steelers on the pro day scouting trail, they haven't been as active as they have been in the past. I know stuff is Rodgers related. They missed Michigan's pro day because they had a 6-hour meeting with Rodgers at the facility. And reports from that sounded like everything went pretty well. But today, Pittsburgh's brass was on hand at Ohio State's pro day. And yesterday, it was reported, actually it was reported this morning that yesterday, Mike Tomlin, Omar Khan met with some of Ohio State's notable prospects in the draft this year, 2 running backs and Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson, and also quarterback Will Howard. Shayne, what do you make of those meetings? I know we saw something similar with Alabama's pro day, and the Steelers have now met with Will Howard, Jalen Milroe. Certainly feels like quarterback is not only on the table, but maybe right in the mid rounds here, rounds 3 and 4.
Yeah, I think that's the sweet spot for them, obviously, especially because the second-round pick is no longer here after the DK Metcalf trade. And frankly, I think the second round is kind of early for everyone in this draft that isn't going to be going in the first round, in my opinion. But, either way, quarterbacks will probably get pushed up the board a little bit because there's some guys that at least have some intriguing traits here. But I do think when it comes to Ohio State guys, Will Howard might be the only guy on the board by the time we pick it after the first round. Like, those 2 running backs are probably off the board somewhere in the second round, if I had to guess. Now, that could change. Like, the draft is so deep at running back. Other positions might get pushed up the board, whatever. So I'm sure they're preparing for that situation. Or maybe they are considering a trade down at some point, maybe at 21. We'll probably hear more about that as we get closer. But to me, the only guy they met with that they realistically have a shot at probably is Howard. And I'm kind of torn on how I feel about that, even in the third round or something like that.
Yeah, the Howard pick to me, Shayne, would very much feel like the Mason Rudolph pick
in
2018.
Yeah.
It's got that same vibe to it where it's like
athlete, but
I think he's going to be a solid quarterback.
Prospect,
yeah, I think he's going to have a long NFL career, probably just as an NFL backup, though, much like Rudolph. And Rudolph was not a bad pick. I mean, hindsight being what it is, you took this guy in the third round. He's going to be 30 years old this summer. He's still playing football. He helped the Steelers out in a pinch, if we're being real honest, in 2023. He's the guy that came in down the stretch and gave him the only life they saw at quarterback all season long. And so Rudolph, and for what it's worth too, still, I believe, has a winning record. I think he's 9-8-1 with the Steelers. I think
perfect Steelers quarterback in that situation.
I mean, really, you're looking at a backup quarterback. You can't expect much more when you're spending a third round pick on one. And so maybe Howard would offer something similar. I just wouldn't get your hopes up to think like, oh, this is going to be the answer to all your problems if you just draft Will Howard at pick 83 or pick 123, whatever that ends up being for the Steelers. I do think that it'll fall in that range. And like you said, Shayne, I think there's almost no chance that Travion Henderson or Quinshon Judkins falls to pick 83. And if this team trades up for a running back in a loaded running back class, I don't know what I'd say. It's a really good running back group. I think those guys are both excellent football players. And that's where it does hurt a little bit to not have that second round pick. But you were able to turn that into Metcalf. I know that there even you, Shayne, we weren't the most keen on that decision to do so. This team likes to make win now moves. Is what they do. And they still think that they are ready to win right now. But it's definitely worth noting the Steelers, the interest that they've taken in the quarterbacks now, not just Will Howard. They had the pro day dinner meeting with Jalen Milroe, who again is a very polarizing prospect in terms of what does he bring to the table? Is he the worst version of Justin Fields because he's got so far to go as a passer, but he's incredible as a runner during his days in Alabama. They met with Quinn Ewers, Shayne, and so with Tyler Shuck as well. And so it absolutely feels like, and some of these guys will be off of the board before pick 83. I've heard buzz that like Shuck could go like really early second round even.
So,
it's something. You're betting on the traits for sure.
Yeah, from the tape this year, like I could get there if I had to, but it just, you have to factor in like the guy's gonna be 26 years old. Like
it's crazy.
And he's played one full season of college football despite being almost 26 years old. Like there's just a lot you got to kind of excuse away with him. But he probably, if I had to be honest with you, like just on tape, he might be the third best quarterback in the class off tape alone, maybe fourth. So you could justify it, but it's I don't know. I don't know about early second round. So
no, I get it for sure. And I think that more than anything else, what we can read into this, it's not one specific player the Steelers are targeting. It's more of where they're going to target this quarterback. And I believe that's going to be round 3 or 4, hopefully leaning a little bit more towards round 4, because you'd like to think that round 3 is a player that could potentially be a player that you can build around, maybe even a second contract guy, or at least somebody that can come in and help them win rather than maybe just what projects as a long-term backup quarterback. I think what'll be really telling, Shayne, is if we, and I know these votes, these 30 visits had to be turned in already, but if we see like a Shedeur Sanders in there, then we know that anything is on the table for the Steelers. Otherwise, I think it's pretty safe to assume we're looking like rounds 3, 4, maybe round 5 range even for the Steelers to target a quarterback. And I do think that they will take one this year, still knowing that they have to take one in the 2026 draft as well. That would be my prediction. Anything else you want to add, Shayne? Pro Day scouting trail?
We have a couple chats that I think would be interesting. From our friend R Barley 18 chiming in. I'd rather trade down and take Hampton, add a second this and next year, or this and then next, then look at a nose tackle like Jamari Caldwell, or I'm assuming he's talking about Tyreek Williams here, and or Stackhouse later on, and a Ty Robinson, interesting Nebraska defensive end, at end later on. I don't hate the idea of that. I will say I wouldn't be shocked if Hampton isn't even there at 21 for the Steelers at this point. His stock, I think, is only going up from this point, especially with how he looked at the combine and just as a player in North Carolina. But if you could move down and get a player like that, I think that makes sense to some degree. Although if I'm trading down, it's probably to take advantage of one of the several defensive linemen that fall later into the first round while picking up hopefully a second and using maybe that on a running back. So, but that process, like that idea of trading back to recoup some value, would make sense, especially depending on how the board falls for them at 21. So,
yeah, I get it. And Hampton is a good prospect. In my opinion, Shayne, in all of my film watching of these running backs, which has been a lot right now, by the way, after like these first 5 guys, I really, really like a lot. And so I would be more apt to, and I know we joked about trading up, but move up a few spots if you feel like someone's going to poach one in round 3. Rather than trading, I would trade back, but I wouldn't trade back to still take a running back.
Right, that's my thought process. That's like you trade back to get value picks that you can then use on a running back later, and not necessarily to take one in the first. So that's kind of what I'd be looking at. Yeah,
and it's worth mentioning too, if you've not seen the video yet circulating on X, Tyreek Williams went down holding his knee. It looked like running the 40-yard dash at the Ohio State Pro Day. Scary scene there. He was able to get up and be aided off the field. I hope that it's nothing serious because obviously it's just a bummer for him in general. But and Williams, I mean, could have potentially been a guy that they would target. Maybe if he was there in round 2, I think possibly go earlier than that, but would have been a very good fit at the nose for sure. So we'll see. We'll keep monitoring and see what his situation is there. But no, I like the thought process there. I'm trading back, and we'll talk about that too when we do our mock draft here in a little bit. But I wouldn't be surprised at all. In fact, I would almost predict you can expect at least one in-draft trade by Omar Khan and the Steelers if they don't make one before that. I think they're going to want to recoup some draft capital for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about Aaron Rodgers then here, Shayne. Is it Aaron Rodgers or bust for the Steelers? Because that's how it's feeling right now. Now, again, don't get me wrong. Aaron Rodgers is not going to be the quarterback that leads this team to the Super Bowl. At least I'd be very surprised if he did. I think that, though, he could potentially be a quarterback that leads them to an 11-6 record and maybe snaps that 8-year drought without a playoff win. Then the question just becomes, you got to ask fans, what's important to you? Do you care about getting that short-term success right now, snapping the playoff drought, getting some of this team morale back, or are you really looking ahead to the future and saying, like, I really don't care what happens in 2025. It's all big picture to me. Are you somewhere in the middle? And so, Shayne, I obviously, if you know me, I would lean more big picture at this point because I just think that it's a little bit naive of this organization to think that Rodgers is going to be the guy that does it for you, though you never know what can happen. Once you cash your ticket into the tournament, you get the right slate of games in front of you. You get hot. Rodgers gets hot at the right time, whatever. Anything is possible. It's more possible with Rodgers than Rudolph. Anybody that thinks otherwise, you're kidding yourself there.
Yeah.
But I still think the chances are very, very slim with Rodgers at the helm for this team to being a legitimate Super Bowl contender.
Yeah, I think the problem ultimately, and like you talked about, would you as a fan perspective, right? Like, would you rather bring Rodgers in, maximize your opportunities for 2025 because of the guys left that are available, especially guys that you can just go out and get, like not draft picks, not guys that could theoretically offer you a little bit of both of that. He is obviously the best option out there. Even the version of him that we saw with the Jets would still be far and away the best quarterback play that's available on the market right now. The problem is if you don't do that and you do just hand the keys to Rudolph this year, are they going to lose 10, 11, 12 games? No. I don't think there's a way out of this in the way that you can look towards the future, really, because Rudolph's probably going to win 9 games because the Steelers win 9 football games every year. And it doesn't matter who the quarterback is. But that's the issue with them, is that because they do that, they never get the quarterback option that can actually elevate them beyond that. So they keep having to do this thing where they're like, oh, we'll do the Pickett's and the Wilsons and the Fields of the world. They've put themselves in a position where they can't even tank if they wanted to. They can't even get a future franchise quarterback in the draft if they wanted to. That won't require them to move massive draft capital to do so, right? So because of that, I do think, as much as I hate the idea of it, if you're just trying to focus on trying to have the most success possible, Rodgers in 2025 will do that for you. And it's going to be a similar outcome in terms of where you're picking than if you had Rudolph, probably. Even if they win a playoff game, it's still, a difference of 7 to 8 picks probably in the draft. So I think they've pigeonholed themselves into having to go for it every year right now.
Yeah, I feel like that's the state they're in. And we know what the Steelers want to do. It's just a matter of, would we do the same thing? And I think that I would be apt to change direction and bite the bullet and take that losing season. John, I understand what you're saying in here. John,
absolutely.
In podcast saying Rodgers could win a ring with the Steelers, is selling hope for cash. I don't think that they can. If you listen to what I just said, I think that the chances are very, very slim with Aaron Rodgers. But we've seen Joe Flacco do it before. We've seen Nick Foles do it before. Can it happen? Yes, there is a mathematical possibility. Yeah. It's just a very small chance. And so would I sell the future for a chance to win now? No, I would not. If you're asking what I would do, I would not do that, because I think that it's more important to build the foundation of the roster, tear this thing down to the studs, build back up again, find your quarterback of the future. All those things are more important than a naive chance to win right now. So don't get my words mixed up here. Like that's where my thought process is. Does Rodgers give the Steelers a better chance to compete in the playoffs than Rudolph's? Yeah, a resounding yes. It's not close to comparable, because he's been there, he's done that. He's still the better option right now, even on a horrendous Jets team that fired all their coaching staff in season. Even though he only led to 5-12 record, he still had the 28 touchdown, nearly 4,000 yard passing season. He's a better quarterback. You can watch the film and see that he is. I think, Shayne, you're looking at a 2-win difference. In my opinion, if I had to guess right now, you're looking at a 9-8 record and falling short of a playoff berth. With Rudolph, you're looking at an 11-6 record and maybe a wild card win with Rodgers. And I wouldn't predict much anything more than that. But I do think that there is clearly a gap between those two quarterbacks. And when we talk about who the options are in free agency right now, there aren't any. I mean, there isn't a second option. I'll read through some of the list right now, especially now that Jameis has signed with the Giants as well. And again, what you talk about a polarizing option there that is such a high variance quarterback, can be on fire for a 3-game stretch and then just look like the worst quarterback in the league as well. You can get Trey Lance, Drew Lock, Joe Flacco, Case Keenum, Easton Stick, Carson Wentz. I mean, what option looks more attractive than Rudolph of those guys right there? And we talked about how big the gap is between Rudolph and Rodgers. Rodgers is the best option if you want to win football games right now. Can you win a Super Bowl? Probably not. But if you want to win football games right now, he's the best option. Shayne, is there any other free agents that entice you at all? At least enough to maybe like save a draft pick this year and just add a third to your roster and like kick Skylar Thompson off the roster?
I mean, even that, it's like
splitting hairs.
Do you just like offer Trey Lance a 3rd-string quarterback job just to have some sort of like athlete at the position, if nothing else, in case stuff really gets bad? Other than that, like, you're not like a Drew Lock to be the backup to Mason Rudolph would be really funny. It's like, man, just pick your poison there at that point. I just think realistically, this is the problem that they put themselves in, because they let both Fields and Wilson, which, granted, I don't mind the Wilson thing because I just don't think that was going to work anymore. But letting them both out the door put them in a position where it's basically, okay, if you want to compete in 2025 in any meaningful way, it probably means Aaron Rodgers has to be your quarterback. And that wouldn't have been the case if Fields was on this roster, or if they found another solution prior to this year that could have stepped in now at this point. But they didn't do that. So now they are in a position where it's like, all right, it's either Mason Rudolph or Aaron Rodgers, or in a like doomsday scenario, it's whatever random 4th-round quarterback you drafted has to come in when Rudolph isn't good or something like that. Like that's what their options are at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Got another comment here from John. Is the gap between Rodgers and Mason Rudolph worth the cash and effort? It depends on who you ask. In my opinion, no, I don't think that it is, because I want moves to get you to be an actual Super Bowl contender and not just the chance to win a playoff game. Like, just isn't enough for me. But if you have to ask the Steelers, absolutely it is. And that's why they're holding off hope that Rodgers is going to sign that deal. But no, I think that, again, we have to start thinking about the long-term picture here, because Rodgers is going to turn 42 late in the season this year, and it just hasn't been enough. I mean, we're holding out a sliver of hope that he can return to the quarterback he was 4 years ago in Green Bay. I just don't see it happening. And I want to read off, I got a couple stats here handy as well. This actually came from Marcus Mosher, who is now one of our contributors at Fansided. So in Aaron Rodgers versus playoff teams in 2024, he had 7 games. In those 7 games, he averaged 6.2 yards an attempt, 9 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, a 78.1 passer rating. Now, again, the talent around you matters, the coaching matters, but this is Aaron Rodgers. It just doesn't look like Aaron Rodgers anymore when you play against good teams. Before, I mean, he could have gone toe-to-toe with anybody. It just wasn't that way last year.
No, and I think the cash aspect of this honestly doesn't matter to me, because it's going to be a 1-year deal. Like whatever amount of money he gets paid, like I don't even really care about that. Like you could argue like, well, saving cap space for moves or any rollover cap, like you can get into conversations about that. But I think most people are just looking at it like, do you want to pay Aaron Rodgers millions of dollars to maybe not be that good? No, I'd rather not do that if I didn't have to. But I think the Steelers, again, have put themselves in a position where they feel they have to do that. So it doesn't really matter what necessarily we think about that.
Well, and here's the other thing, Shayne, that again, it comes back to this, and I wrote a couple articles about this. Aaron Rodgers was cut by the Jets, and so he will not count against your comp formula either. So if he wasn't, he would certainly wipe away that 3rd-round pick the Steelers are projected to get next year for Dan Moore, of all people. But he's not, he really, other than costing you cap space this year, it's not going to hurt you any beyond that, because all the reports suggest the Steelers are only offering him a 1-year deal. They're going to be done with it after this season, and it will not count against the comp formula. And so because of that, it's not the worst thing in the world to do. But what I think it's ultimately going to result in is you getting a 5 or 6 spots worse in the draft next year. But maybe it can come with a little bit of playoff success, at least enough to scratch that itch for some fans who don't want this thing to linger on a decade here. We talked about free agent options. There isn't anybody notable out there. Nobody better than Rudolph, honestly, as at least the number 2 quarterback for the Steelers. Options in the draft, Shayne, we touched on those already as well. And really something short of Shador slipping to 21, or at least within range of the Steelers moving up, because I don't think it's going to be Cam Ward. I think that Ward's going to go much higher for sure at this point, and Shador probably will as well. But if one of those 2 guys slips, I think it's Shador. We've discussed this before on this podcast, whether or not we'd be willing to trade up for a player like Shador. Jackson Dart, I know that you're not a big fan of. I've got a 2nd-round grade. I might move him to a 2-3 grade. I just don't think that that's the type of player I'd be willing to take a chance on. Certainly not in the 1st round, but on day 2, it becomes more enticing. He's just probably not going to be available to Steelers because they don't have a 2nd-round pick. And so would you be at all intrigued? I'll ask you again, if Shador fell, let's say he falls to like the 15, 16 range, would you be moving up for him at that point?
As much as like beggars can't be choosers, right? And at this point, the Steelers are certainly in beggar territory compared to a lot of teams in the league. I just simply don't have a high enough grade on Shador to give up draft capital to go get him. I think if he fell to 21, you'd have to have the conversation about like, is he going to be good enough to justify taking here and hope that he can be the quarterback for a long time, ideally. Even that is really questionable to me because of the offensive environment he's going to be in, where, you have a bunch of vertical threats. He's not really a vertical passer to me. And so how does that fit with the current core receivers? Do they really care about that because he's at least a better prospect than a lot of guys they've been looking at in this range the past couple of years? Like, it's hard to say like how that would turn out. Like I've said before, my comp on him is like Vikings Teddy Bridgewater, like that version of Teddy Bridgewater, which that's a guy that can win games for you. But the Steelers' problem isn't winning enough games to make the playoffs. It's winning once they get into the playoffs. And I don't necessarily know if Shedeur is going to be the guy that elevates them above the level of play they need to get to win playoff games consistently. So it's a better answer than they've had in a while, but I don't know if it's the answer that is worth using another first round pick on ultimately.
Yeah, Shayne, that would be the only one really that would at least get me thinking there. Jackson Dart, who I like better than you, but still not a lot. I mean, like Jackson Dart, if he was in the 2022 class, he would have been my number one quarterback. It's just such a low bar then that's, and you might have a different opinion, but it's just, he checks boxes, but he doesn't exceed those boxes very well in what he does. And so I view him as like this guy who should be drafted in the second round, like middle of the second round. Steelers don't have a second round pick. And so I'm not considering taking him there at pick 21. And there's talks that he can go even before Pittsburgh's pick in the first round, which just shows you how desperate teams get for quarterbacks. They need them. So Shayne, the question then becomes, what would you do if you were running this organization? You've got a choice right now. Do you pull that offer away from Aaron Rodgers? Is Aaron Rodgers your best bet this year? Do you take one in the draft? Like, how do you go into the 2025 season with what type of quarterback situation instead of looking at like the long-term fix here?
Yeah, I mean, if you drop me into the scenario that they're currently in, and I knew that, okay, Mason Rudolph I'm in danger of having him be my 17-game starter right at this moment in time, right? And I don't plan on moving up in the draft for Shedeur Sanders because I'm not just high enough on him. I think you have to keep the Rodgers situation going. I think you have to try to bring him in. If let's say he decides he's retiring or he decides he's just not playing for the Steelers for whatever reason, at that point, I'm probably trading back in the first round. I am trying to recoup a second round pick for next season, not for this year, with the hope that 2026 offers me something that I can justify moving up in the draft to get a quarterback and kind of letting things play out in 2025. Because especially being in the Steelers organization, you get a long leash generally to do things, as we know. So I think that would be the best chance I could give this team of having a potential future at the position would be to trade back in a draft where the guy you get at 30 or 31 or 32 is going to be a similar caliber player you get at 21. Try to get a second round pick or so next year, maybe a couple other picks, late round picks this year, something like that, just to add to your draft haul. And then try to be ready to go for something in 2026 if the opportunity presents itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good strategy overall, Shayne. We talk about windows all the time here, and the Steelers, unfortunately, they let one window of opportunity pass after the next. Now you've got Hayward, who turns 36 years old in May. TJ Watt turns 31 early in the season this year. Unfortunately, these guys were never given a real shot to compete in the postseason their entire career so far. And so does Rodgers give you that shot? I don't like I said, I don't think it's a legitimate shot, but it's obviously really better than what Rudolph would give you. And so if you're looking at like, we've hit desperation mode, we've got to try to get some type of playoff success now before Hayward's career is over with, before Watt is past his prime. We just traded for DK Metcalf. Like, I understand taking the stab to do that right now. I think that they've missed half a dozen opportunities along the way, but this is it. I mean, this really is your last chance to find playoff success, or we may go a several year window here. Like, I don't know. I really don't think, no matter what, no matter who's out there, I don't think the Steelers would be in the market for doing this for a fifth year in a row, like streaming a new quarterback. I think they want a long-term answer. And so what does that mean for the future of the team? Well, you're probably going to take your lumps with a rookie quarterback in 2026. And so you're going to have Watt going into age 32 season, then Hayward possibly retired next offseason, if not going into age 37 season. And so this might be the last chance that the best players on the team, Watt and Hayward, have to compete for playoff success. And so the Steelers will try to look to do everything they can to capitalize on this window right now. That's what I think. And I think that they will try to go with Aaron Rodgers if they can make that work.
Yeah.
All right. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. All right, Shayne, let's just talk about the Steelers pre-draft visits here really quickly, and then we're going to move on to our live what would we do 7-round Steelers mock draft. So let's run down through some of the players that they have brought in for these 30 visits so far. Quarterback Tyler Shuck, we talked about him a little bit. It seems like the Steelers are at least intrigued to go that route now, where you'd have to take Shuck. If he ends up going that high in the draft, they might miss out on him, but they want to do their due diligence anyway. Maybe he falls at least within striking distance of that 3rd round, and they like him enough there. But we'll skip past the quarterbacks because we brushed on those already. Running backs, Shayne, that's where it's at for this team. They are very intrigued, and it looks like, based on their visits, a 3rd round running back is very much on the dock. They met with DJ Giddens of Kansas State, Dylan Sampson of Tennessee, Vishal Tootin of Virginia Tech, Ollie Gordon, who I'm not super fond of because just kind of lacks the speed and explosion. If you go back to his 2023 tape, I thought it was much better from Oklahoma State. Jaden Blue, who ran, I think it was a 4.28 40-yard dash for Texas. So all these guys outside of Ollie Gordon, they're blazing. I mean, these are fast running backs. They've got speed and they've got burst. They're closer to the Jaylen Warren types than they are to the Najee Harris types, which is interesting because Warren is the guy that's returning and not Najee. But it's clear they want to get explosive at the position. And based on the guys they've met with so far for pre-draft visits, it absolutely looks like there's a very good chance this team could target a running back at pick 83 in the 3rd round.
Yeah, and I think that's the sweet spot to get one of the last guys that I think are not just really great players, because it's going to be great guys down the board even from that, but players who profile as potential starters long term, like as the lead back for you. DJ Giddens is the one that I'm kind of most interested in that they brought in because he tested very well at the combine, but to me, he's not really a burner. He's just smooth as butter as a runner.
Yeah.
Like more of that type of runner, which they still love that for like an outside zone system or a zone system in general. I think he'd make a lot of sense. He had weird drops this past year, but his receiving profile is also very good overall. But you take those away, there's weird concentration drops more so than just bad hands. So he could be a potential 3-down back for them too. Dylan Sampson out of Tennessee makes a ton of sense too. He's another Blazer type for sure as well. Vishal Tootin is weird for me because he's an absolute slam dunk fit for the scheme, but I also I don't know how many carries I want to give him. So if you take him to the 3rd round, you maybe not use him enough ultimately. He's the weirdest one in this group for me because I'd rather take him in the 4th if I could get him there. But he might not last till then because an outside zone team is going to be that guy can get 1,000 yards for me if I give him enough touches. That's kind of the issue with him. But yeah, those guys are all very interesting to me.
Yeah, Giddens is the guy I like best on the list. I've watched tape on a lot of tape on these guys here. He is so elusive in the open field. Reminds me very much of a Tony Pollard type running back. And I think that you could get a really good rookie contract out of him. Tootin is interesting because, man, he is so explosive. And he tested that way, too. It lines up with the film. Ran a 4.32. I think it's a 43-inch vertical, 40-inch
something
vertical,
ridiculous.
11'6" broad jump. The guy is explosive. And so you mentioned getting him in the 4th. I'd love to get him in the 4th. And just that profile there.
Yeah,
when you are heavier and tested as a better athlete than Jahmyr Gibbs, I just don't know if you're going to last that
he's
long.
A 49er, right? He's going to be the 3rd round back that the Niners take. They do
it would make too much sense. Yes.
You're going to end up taking him in the 3rd. We
get spark athletes.
Yeah, I know. We should just put that in stone. Yeah. So.
But the wide zone runner, that's so intriguing because that fit would be good too. It has fumble issues.
But that's why you give him too many touches. That's the thing, right? It's
this class is so much better than last year's, though, Shayne. You remember how bad it was. It was Jonathan Brooks, who had coming off an ACL tear, and Jalen Wright. I think all the guys that we mentioned would have been.
Thank goodness for Bucky Irving, right? Because otherwise that class might have been.
Yeah,
nothing.
Really.
That's the sad part. Yeah.
Really. So at wide receiver now, though, Shayne, this looks like it's on the 3rd round radar as well because the Steelers' 30 visits at the wide receiver position have been Jalen Noel, Savion Williams, and Jaden Higgins. And Savion might go to the 4th round. This guy's so raw. Like, what do you do with them?
You hope he's
but the other two, though,
kind of.
yeah, it's Cordero to a T. Like, it's
pretty much what
so hard
Joby
not
is.
to see that. He's like 6'3 3/4, 225 pounds. Probably a better running back, honestly, than a receiver, and stuck in between two positions. So Savion's super interesting because he's electric with the ball in his hands, but he's just not natural as a wide receiver. But Jalen Noel, I think, is a guy that's really intriguing. He can create space. He's really athletic. Smaller receiver, played a lot from the slot. And then Jaden Higgins, who a lot of people really like. I think that even Christopher Passo just mocked him in the 1st round, which I think that's a little bit rich. But it looks like wide receiver would be on the dock in the 3rd round as well, assuming that one of these guys is available here.
Yeah, I mean, Savion I'd be shocked if he isn't. The other two, I'll be honest, I don't think they get outside the top 50, either one of them. I really
That's
don't.
how I feel too. Yeah.
It's just, especially with Noel, the way he tested, because my concern with him on tape was he won so often vertically from the slot, but I'm like, is he really that fast? Because his build gave me the idea like this is a like legit rugged slot receiver. And then he tested the way he did. I'm like, oh, so maybe he just is vertical slot receiver then. And that completely kind of flipped this. Like that's one thing that the draft and the draft process can do for you is you watch a player and you're like, that's a weird skill set. Like I wonder how that's going to work. And then you see him test, like, oh, so he is just that fast. He is just that explosive. Okay. That changes things. Because at this point, with my wide receiver rankings, at least Higgins and Noel are right next to each other at 7 and 8, respectively. So they are very much in that second tier of wide receivers that should go early on day 2. So the Steelers probably aren't getting either of those players unless it is a trade down situation where they do pick up a 2nd round pick, maybe. And even then, it might not be a high enough 2nd round pick to get either one of them. So those are the ones that are a little awkward, though, for them, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to grab one of these guys here,
sure.
but I just, without that 2nd round pick, I think you're looking at the rawest of raw. Like Savion, it will be there, I think, in the 3rd round.
Yeah,
maybe
I'd be shocked.
A round or two longer than that.
Maybe
it's just, it's at least on the table, I think, for them and what they're looking at. And I think that it should be. I think that if you're really doing your due diligence here, you're going to make sure that your next quarterback, whoever that is in 2026, is well equipped, coming into a good situation. The only other visits that they've had that have been reported so far are some along the defensive line. JJ Pugas, how do you say that last name?
I think it's Puguez or something like that.
Yaha Black.
Weird.
Yeah, Yaha Black from Iowa, Joshua Farmer, Florida State, and Elijah Roberts from SMU. The Steelers have a type here. Like Yaha he's a really big and long football player. Not the greatest tape from what I've seen.
Not the best athlete.
But they do have a type, and obviously defensive line is a need. And so I would think, Shayne, that what they're looking at is either these guys in a double up situation, or if they miss out early on entirely, then maybe you take a Joshua Farmer, something like that. One of these guys here to get you a body in that defensive line room.
Yeah, Farmer's probably the best player on this, like on their list of guys so far. I do wonder if he's going to be somewhere in the 2nd to early 3rd, though. Honestly, like
I think
he's a very good athlete. His tape is weird, where he was the only good player on the defensive line at Florida State, so they kind of targeted him a lot. So I think that's part of why. But some snaps he just absolutely obliterates blockers, and the other snaps he gets completely washed. And I'm like, is this guy just overworked because he's getting like attacked every play? Like I do wonder with him if it's like a motor situation or just a technique problem where sometimes he gets just obliterated because he doesn't have the technique to anchor. But he's at least an interesting player that I think goes off the board somewhere between their 1st and 3rd round picks. So the other guys, though, I imagine, especially like some of the guys down the board, are going to be there at their pick at 83 and on. So
yeah, I think that it's very possible that they could try to double up if they trade back, but I don't know if they've got the resources to do it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Unless they end up doing something like that. And Shayne, just a few other nuggets I want to throw out here, unrelated to the Steelers, kind of, but some of the things happening at recent pro days here.
Yeah.
So Will Campbell, the LSU offensive tackle, tested, measured in with, and we have confirmation now, combine and pro day, the shortest wingspan ever recorded for an offensive tackle, according to Mock Draftable's database since 1999. And so likely going to move him into guard in the NFL. I'm sure a team will at least try to experiment with him. But you have to wonder how that impacts his draft stock. Is he going to end up sliding because of something like that? We've seen the struggles with Peter Skoronski so far in the NFL. And so you have to wonder if he takes a similar route there.
It's really tough with him. Yeah, it's tough with him.
It is.
But, yeah.
The other one that I wanted to mention, Shayne, is just because it's just such an odd situation, because I think the film is pretty good. But Xavier Restrepo ended up running a 4.83 at his Miami Pro Day. Wide receiver, 5'9", 200-pound wide receiver. That's undraftable bad. I mean, it's really, really bad. And I know he issued a tweet there and said something about, I think he was dealing with a hamstring issue or something that way, but it's not good. It's really, it makes you wonder, like, why did your agent tell you to do this? Like, you just hurt yourself tremendously in this process. So
I think the thing that sucks for him is, like, he's so clearly not a 4.83 player that I want to believe that this isn't going to matter for him. I think he was always going to be a guy that was a late day 2, early day 3 specific fit for a team that needs that type of slot receiver. Like, his range of outcomes was always going to be there. And I don't know if this 40 does anything, especially if we now know that because I knew he was hurt. Like, as soon as you saw him, it's like, that guy's hurt. That's not what Xavier Restrepo looks. I thought he'd run like in the 4.59 to 4.65 range. Like, I knew he wasn't going to be fast. That's just not his game. But 4.83 is, I'm sorry, you're not putting up the numbers he did. You're not getting away from guys separating the way he did at 4.83. You're just not doing it. I'm sorry. So for him, feel bad, shouldn't have run, definitely. But maybe some teams will like the competitive aspect of it. Like Gunnar Helm had a situation at the combine similar where he got banged up on his 40, ran terrible, but still did all the drills. And turns out, oh, my ankle looks insane. It looks terrible. So maybe teams will appreciate that. But in general, I'm not really stressed about it for him. I think he'll be okay.
Yeah, I agree. I still think there's a route for him to be that good football player. And I saw him the same way, 4.6, 4.65 guy.
Something like that.
That did surprise me a little bit. So hopefully it was injury related. I don't think that Restrepo is going to be someone who is particularly on the Steelers' radar. I think that he was a great college football player, but they've got a couple of slot receivers already. I think that they may be targeting a different type potentially, but they've got outside threats too. And so makes me wonder what they're going to do with Pickens. Like, do you think that this team trades Pickens by the NFL draft, or are they just going to roll with them and take your 1-year rental at this point, which is what he's going to be? He's not going to sign an extension. There's just no way this team devotes that much money to the wide receiver position and a player like him who is they've had issues with so far.
That's the problem ultimately with this is, like, if they don't deal him now, like, are they going to take it into the season, see how things are going, and at the deadline try to flip him for something? Because, like, I guess doing it that way, like, if he's still productive through however many weeks, maybe you get a pick in next year's draft that's more meaningful to you because you can maybe use it as ammo, or you can just have more capital then. But yeah, like, I think we all know that realistically, the Steelers probably, I know the DK Metcalf thing has thrown a wrench into, like, how much money are they willing to spend? How much are they willing to do this and that? I don't think anyone really believes that they're going to extend him for any serious amount of time. Like, you could get a franchise tag situation if it goes really well this year and they don't want to lose him or something like that. And then maybe it's a tag and trade situation, or they just keep him around for the year. But the odds of him being on this team long term really went down to almost zero, I think, once the Metcalf trade happened.
Yeah, I agree. We talked about how this team tends to look short-sighted, and so it wouldn't surprise me if they just held on to him for that 1-year rental, essentially. But I think the question that the front office should be asking themselves right now is it better to have Pickens for 1 year and maybe deal with some of the headaches that come their way this year, talking to the media, on field, whatever it is, effort issues at times? Is it better to have 1 year of Pickens and let's say maybe he gets you 1,000 to 1,200 yards, even play next to Metcalf? He's capable of doing that.
Yeah.
Or is it better to essentially flip him for what could be maybe you can get a Jaden Higgins. Maybe you can turn that into Bashal too, and something else that you can get on a 4-year contract at least and kind of look ahead towards the future. So I think the question should be asked at the very least, especially knowing what the Steelers have dealt with Pickens in his first 3 seasons here. Not always the most consistent football player, and he kind of crumbled down the stretch for the Steelers. That Cincinnati game was abysmal, that the final game of the year there. So All right, Shayne, are we ready to jump into our what would we do 7-round mock draft for the Steelers? You got that ready for us here?
Yes, I do. Let me just get it pulled up so everybody can see here. So
All right.
here we go. So we're using
So,
PFS mock draft just because I have access to it, and there we go. That's pretty much the reasoning for that one there. And so this again will be what we do, Tommy. So we'll do some more like predictive stuff closer to the draft once we have some more like finishing out the top 30 visits. We know pro days, all that good stuff, because usually we can start to narrow that down pretty heavily once we have that information. But for now, we're just going to go off our own personal board. So I think what we should do is when we get to each pick, I'm going to throw out a couple of names. You can throw out a couple of names if you have different names. We just kind of whittle it down to what we ultimately like collectively think here. So,
all right, Shayne, that sounds good. And for those that aren't on YouTube and those just listening on Spotify, Alexa, elsewhere, we'll just be sure to tell you some of the players that are available here as well as the picks come. Go ahead, Shayne.
And I'll probably briefly kind of talk about like players that have gone, just, BFS mock draft. If for those of you who use it, sometimes they do some funny stuff. I will admit that. So we'll have to bear with us there. But in general, we should be able to get a good idea of what will be available here. So let's start the draft here. I have just the Steelers selected. So we should get, there we go. So we're at 21. So let's just look a little bit at what's gone by already. So Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders go 1-2. I think that's still possible. Tommy, I don't know about you. Like, I do think the Browns could do that if they really feel like, hey, Kenny Pickett's not going to be the answer as the quarterback this year. Abdul Carter, Will Campbell at 4, still goes at 4. Interesting. So Travis Hunter falls all the way to 6 in this situation. Interesting to the Raiders. That's the type of stuff where I'm like, I don't think that's going to happen, but it is what it is. Golden to the Bears at 10. Interesting. Ashton Jeanty today. The Dolphins. If anything, they definitely need more running backs, right? That's definitely what the Dolphins need. But no, so we'll get to here. So just looking at the board as it is, I want to talk about, I'm sure you're in the same boat, the defensive line first here, I think is where we want to look at. Kenneth Grant's on the board, Walter Nolan's, Derek Harmon, all guys that I think make some amount of sense for the Steelers. I can also throw receivers up here because even with the trade of DK Metcalf, I think the value here could be good. Although really it's just Luther Burden left. So it looks like Emeka Egbuka maybe would have been the last one that just went at 20. So we're probably mostly, unless there's another position you want to take a look at here, we're probably looking at defensive line if we're sticking and picking here.
Okay, so Shayne, so let me share my thoughts, and then we'll make this final decision. I want to know what you think and which player specifically, but here's where my line of thinking goes. The Steelers absolutely need defensive line help. There's no question. We've been following the trail of breadcrumbs. It's what they need. Cam Hayward, like we talked about Hayward's age already. Keanu Benton is literally the only somewhat only block piece on this entire interior defensive line. And so you need that player. I like Harmon a lot. I like Kenneth Grant as a scheme fit. I think he would be a tremendous scheme fit. You plug him right into the zero technique. I think he could be here for a long time. Your modern day version of Casey Hampton, if you will. Derek Harmon, more versatile. I like Harmon's traits even better, quite frankly. But I want to throw this out there and just get your thoughts on it at least. If the Steelers, if I was in charge here, and if I was doing what I thought was best for the future of this franchise, knowing that the worst thing I could possibly do is get my quarterback in a situation to fail, I would strongly consider going wide receiver still. I know that this is the year rental of George Pickens. I think that DK is going to be at least a really solid receiver for probably 3, maybe 4 years for the Steelers. To get a long-term option to pair to and a guy that you literally just dump the ball down to and can make things happen after the catch like a Luther Burden, I would be super enticed by to go that direction in the draft. Having said that, I do think it makes more logical sense in the here and now to go the defensive lineman, but that's just my 2 cents on where I would go with this selection. I do like Burden better than the consensus is going to. I think that he has a chance, an outside chance to be a number 1 receiver in the NFL just because he's so electrifying with the ball in his hands. So, Shayne, having said all that, who would be your pick at 21 for the Steelers?
So I will say I definitely, from the receiver perspective, I get it. And I think if one of Matthew Golden or Emeka Egbuka was here, it would probably be an easy decision for me. if we're going to go receiver. I like Burden a lot, but I do wonder. I think the problem with him is the range of outcomes for him are a little wider than I'd love to take at 21 as a receiver, because you hope he can be a Z that also plays in the slot, that can be a gadgety kind of guy. You hope he can be a little bit more of a developed receiver version of like a Deebo Samuel, right? Who this team was interested in at different times. So that would make sense for what they're looking for. But I wonder if, especially early on, especially if they keep Pickens on the roster, what is he going to really be in year one and even maybe year two, depending on how the receiver room shakes out, when the quarterback might be Aaron Rodgers 1 year and then who knows the next year, right? So that would be my only hang up with it, is the range of outcomes on him being a little bit more just all over the place. And then also how much value is he going to bring, not just this year, but even into the future, depending on what kind of quarterback they ultimately bring in here.
And so, Shayne, yeah, because this is a first round pick here, and we want to be able to share these opinions out here, rank your picks. What would you do 1, 2, and 3? Because I'll give you mine.
Yeah, that's I think a good way to do, especially these early picks. I think for me, Derek Harmon's the best player on the board for me currently right now. He's my number one interior defender. That's just kind of what it comes down to for me. Kenneth Grant is up there too, just because again he would bring even more of the run defense and the size this defense has been missing on the interior for a long time, but obviously not as much pass rush potential. Even though the athletic profile tells you he could get there, it's still not nearly as likely as Derek Harmon has already shown that. And then I will say probably, especially for the needs, Burden would be the third pick then in that order for me.
Okay, Shayne. And so I would go, if I was picking right now, I would go Burden, Harmon, Grant, because I think that you got to be able to score points. I like Burden a lot more than you do. I'm going to have him over Golden and Igbuka.
Gotcha.
And so I just think that he's just a lot more dynamic football player than those guys. It does worry me a little bit. Can he run routes? Can he do the full route tree? Is he more of a glorified Deebo Samuel, that type of thing? I really like him still. Harmon, I just have very few questions. Like, I think he's a good run defender. He's a good pass rusher. I think that obviously he's long and strong. He's just scratching the surface of his potential.
You can move him up and down the line. He can
up
play
and down the defensive line.
Yeah, for sure.
Where Grant is a little bit more linear, where he's going to be a 0 and a 1 tech, and that's essentially where you're going to slide him. And I think he could be a really good one. It's valuable. It's still valuable. So Shayne, my thought here is, do you want to meet in the middle with Derek Harmon? We both like Harmon a lot. Take our Harmon with this pick right here, and I would be. By the way, I'd be perfectly content with this selection. One of my favorite moves the Steelers could make in this draft would be taking Derek Harmon, because I do think that there's a ton more potential for Harmon to be Hayward's replacement than there is for Kenneth Grant. Grant is just such a different type of player who specializes as a run defender, which I still think is very important. But Harmon is just a through and through 3-down player with a lot more pass rush juice, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. That's ultimately where I think I'd want to go to. Now, I am curious. There is some trade things that I'm getting thrown at me as well here. So I'm curious what that would be like. So the Texans and Bills would be
trade down is definitely possible here.
Yeah.
I really see the Steelers moving back. Spots.
Could a team like the Texans in the situation, if you look at the board with the offensive line here, could they come up for a Kelvin Banks or a Josh Simmons if they like the health with him? Something like that potentially.
The fact that Banks is on the board right now is super interesting to me. Like, I don't know where you fall on Banks, but
he's my number one pure tackle.
That would be a value pick for me right here. It's just, has any team ever taken 3 offensive tackles in the first round 3 years?
No. I don't think they should.
So I think you'd be looking at a heck of an insurance policy for Broderick or Fautanu, and then somebody's kicking inside to play there. But I think it's a bit of a luxury. So
for sure. But I think, like, if a Texans team wanted to come up, say, a few picks, could you get 25 and like 89 for 89 and like 156?
Yeah, I think that would probably check out on the draft calculator.
Something like that, where you can pick up an extra third. And I have a feeling we might still get Harmon or Grant in this situation.
I would go that route, and I do believe the Steelers would too. I think if if Harmon and Grant were both on the board in this situation, and depending on what they think of Walter Nolan, I really like Walter Nolan's film, but I heard some off
it's
the field
just
stuff
there's some
very
stuff
concerning.
unfortunately.
So if the character checks out for the Steelers with Nolan, I think they would even more so be willing to move back. But Shayne, I like that trade, and I think that it's something Pittsburgh would strongly consider if available to him in the draft. So do you want to execute that?
I think that if this gets accepted, which should be again 25.89 for 21, we give just a late round pick just to make it look a little better for the draft value. I think that's probably good. I would at least offer this and see. Yeah, so they took that.
Accepted.
So if we look, they came up weirdly enough for Malachi Starks, but let's just assume they took the tackle because that's what would make more sense. And we have the exact same options on the board that we did, so that's awesome for this.
I would do it again.
Right. If you
I don't know if the Steelers would risk doing it again.
I don't think you do it again, but I think at this point, I would still probably go Harmon at this point for me. So
I'm good. I mean, honestly, this would be like the picture perfect
situation.
If you were able to move back a few spots in the first round, still get a guy that you love, who I think can be Hayward's eventual replacement, and pick up an earlier pick, get back into day 3 again, like, or excuse me, day 2, and grab another day 2 pick again. I think that's perfect. So yeah, let's go Harmon with this.
All right. So gonna have to wait a little while to see another pick here, but I'm curious what we have available when we get to this point. So let's look at the board here. So, okay, I want to look at running back here. Throw them up. I want to look at receiver again, too, since we didn't go there in the first round. So Jalen Noel is here. Now, I don't know if I believe he will be, but he is here in the third round. Yeah. DJ Giddens is here. We talked about him. Some other guys, Jaden Blue, Bashal Tootin, guys like that. RG Harvey, I'm a big fan of. Not sure if, like, his profile is weird just because he's an older player, because of his college career and how that played out. So he might not be a guy that gets drafted particularly high. But any other positions you want to see quarterback too, maybe?
Yeah, throw it up there. I mean, I doubt that I would go that direction.
Yeah, I mean, you got Will Howard, Riley Leonard. That's Kyle McCord I'm a fan of, but Tyler Shuck is here. He's ranked really low in PFF though, so he might not be here at this point.
Do we want to? That's the thing, Shayne. Do we want to try to? I know that this is PFF's predictive, but if we don't think they're going to be there, should we draft?
I generally try to do that too. Yeah, like so Jalen Noel, I'd probably say no. Jalen Rose, I think would be here still. Maybe Savion might still be here. I think all the running backs that are here could easily be here for sure. I don't think that's
maybe just pop up corner.
That's a good point too. Yeah, let me take these out for a second and throw corner up here. The top corner is Dorian Strong, who I haven't watched corners heavily yet. Jacob Parrish, the Kansas players, Noel Williams. Like I haven't watched corners too much yet, so I'm not too sure where I would land
enticing
on that.
enough there. I don't think to sway us that direction.
See, I feel like because especially we went defense first round, I think targeting an offensive playmaker of some kind here makes a lot of sense.
So here's my thought, Shayne, is I really like Jalen Noel. I just don't think he's going to be. I think he tested too well. I think his film is too good. I think he goes late second, early third, and I don't think he's available at this pick. So if we're trying to keep this realistic too, my favorite player that I'm seeing up there right now is DJ Giddens. Like, if Giddens fell. Yeah. Now, I know that Dallas likes him. I think that they would pounce at the opportunity to draft him in the third, but they might take a running back sooner than that even. And so
they might.
If they do, then he could be there potentially for the Steelers. Royals would be interesting. Savion feels a little bit rich just because he's
maybe a little early for him. Yeah.
So, but what are your thoughts with the guys that are available right here?
I think Giddens makes a lot of sense, like you said. Royals would also make a lot of sense for me because I think that he's just a different type of player than anyone they have in the room right now. It might be a good pairing with Metcalf long term. As another outside receiver guy, has inside versatility as well. I'm a big Devin Neal guy, but he's going to go later than even this because just the athleticism isn't there. He's
Shayne,
an interesting guy.
I want to know your thoughts on Isaiah Bond. How does he make you feel?
So Isaiah Bond, it makes me upset because I think that realistically, and there's actually a draft show that I do with some friends of mine. There's an ongoing bit where I always wonder how early one of my guys I do it with is going to try to take Isaiah Bond, and I always laugh at him for it. But the problem with Bond ultimately is I just think he should have stayed at school another year. Like I just don't think he's developed enough as a receiver, and the speed is better than even the 4.40. I will say, like, the speed is truly there.
For sure.
but I think he's a 2 or 3 year project realistically as a receiver. So
Okay.
some team that drafts him late will probably hit on him if they have the time to develop him and they don't need him to come in and be an impact right away. But I think it's a project for sure. I'd touch him probably after the 4th round.
Okay. Yeah. I would be really enticed by him if he was there in the 4th round. I like him a little bit. Just the athletic profile.
The potential. Yeah. The potential there is incredible. It's just how long
I see
have to wait to
some shade of Jalen Waddle in his game for sure. But yeah, definitely a project. Based on like the depth of the running back still, would you go Royals over a Giddens?
I might, because we pick again at 89 here. And you look at the teams here, a lot of receiver needy teams in this range.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much running back. Like maybe the Broncos, if they haven't already taken one earlier in the draft, could make some sense there. Chargers, at least for the time being, at least for 2025, are okay at running back, but maybe they want to get a future there too. But I think we're more likely to get one of our running backs we like at 89 than necessarily Royals specifically, because Noel being here helps us too a little bit because he could go before him. But I think that
if you were being predictive though, and we think that he's gone, then
right, that doesn't matter anyway for the purposes of this.
So I would be good with Royals at this pick if you wanted to then look running back next.
I think that I would like that too. So let's take Royals here. And then, so we have, I think, let me just check here. The only running back goes is Harvey, which again, I like, but probably for the Steelers might be a little bit too much of a short-term answer, honestly. Giddens, I think still being here makes this pick relatively easy for both of us, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, Giddens is probably my favorite overall player left on the board. It comes out of huge positional need. I don't know if he lasts until 89, but I think that there's at least a chance.
In this
running back room is it all comes down to preference. Like there's so many good running backs this year. One of the best classes I've ever graded. There's a chance that a guy that we really like a DJ Giddens could slip. And so, I mean, I would be all over this pick. So that one would be a above value pick for me. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's where I would go to here. So let's get Giddens off the board here. Then we're going to get to the 4th round here. So this is where I think you start the conversation about if we want to agree with the Steelers of taking a day 3 quarterback or someone in that range, that we can look at this position. If not, I would also throw in like defensive back in general, honestly. Like who's left at defensive back would be interesting. I like Billy Bowman Jr. a lot as like a third safety, honestly, but just throwing that out there. But I think this is kind of the positions maybe you want to look at this point now that we've addressed kind of the biggest needs on the roster, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. I can absolutely get behind this is the range where I would start talking about getting behind one of the quarterbacks because you get him for a whole rookie contract. We know that they're going to want one anyway. I do think that now the value actually starts lining up. We talk 2nd and 3rd round. It's a little bit rich, but I think that that's a position that would be enticing. Again, Tyler Shuck is there. I just don't think he's going to be there. From everything that we've heard so far, it just sounds like he's going much earlier than that. Dylan Gabriel's a good football player. I know that he's tiny, but it's just he's also old, and it just can you rip that ball when you're 5'10", 190 pounds in the AFC North? I don't know. Howard is like Mason Rudolph from the pocket at least, and so and then you share your thoughts on Ewers for everybody again, real quick, Shane.
Yeah, so Quinn Ewers, my problem with him ultimately is that I think he has negative pocket presence, like not just bad pocket presence, but like to the point where I worry that he's ever going to be able to play NFL quarterback for any consistent amount of time. Now, I do know he was banged up this past year, but that's another problem with him. And I know Josh Orris, who does our shows on Mondays, definitely check that out. He's a big Quinn Ewers guy. I think he wants to look past a lot of the flaws and the injuries because of the talent level that's there sometimes. But I think the problem is all the excuses you have to make for him just make him that much more of a polarizing player to me, where like I don't even know if he profiles as a good backup because he gets hurt so often. So if he's your backup plan and he's an injury risk, like then you might have to go to your 3rd quarterback if he ever has to play. So for me, I would he's kind of just a guy that's not on my board personally. Like if I was drafting for a team, not because he's not talented enough to be drafted, but because I think the flaws are so evident that it may just dissuade me from wanting him to be in my quarterback room, basically.
That's true. But I think that's I mean, I can get behind what Josh is saying to an extent. Like, how big of a swing do you want to take? This
For
guy
sure,
was
like
number
from a
one
talent
recruit in the nation.
perspective, yeah.
So in my mind, you compare him to a guy like Howard. Like Howard is the high floor, low ceiling backup quarterback that you're getting probably a very stable backup, which I think most teams would rather have at this stage in the draft because probably the chances of Ewers turning out to be that guy is just so slim.
Yeah.
But if they both hit their ceiling, there's no doubt in my mind that Ewers has more to work with than what Howard does there too. It's just, would you opt for the safer play? Just knowing like you're talking about a 4th round pick, you're going to get a backup quarterback. It's very, very unlikely you go and find a Dak Prescott at this point in the draft. So having said that too, Shayne, with the names that are available here, and to me, there's a drop off. I know you like McCord more than I do. Like I see 3 quality backups here, McCord and beyond. If we're not counting Shuck, I'm just not very fond of. So would you roll the dice and just wait another round and try to get one in the 5th round and go a different direction?
I mean, if we did give 156 to the Texans in that trade, so we'll be waiting a little while to pick. But I will say, now this is just me. I'm not gonna like fight for it necessarily that much because I still think it's unlikely. But of the quarterbacks on the board that I would take, because of Shuck's age, McCord would be my pick. I think he's the best quarterback on the board currently, other than Shuck, who again I just think won't be here, like you said. And the age thing and the injury thing is just a lot for me. So I think McCord, like his range of outcomes is either just like a high volatility backup, which sometimes can be good, or you get like 85 to 90% Baker Mayfield. Like that's kind of what like current Baker Mayfield. Like that's kind of what I think his. I don't think he has quite the arm he does or quite the mobility he does, but I think from a like play style perspective and the ability to push the ball down the field, the willingness to throw into tight windows, that type of stuff, I think you could potentially get that out of him. But even that's like a huge, like, you really got to hope that's what he, like he would have to continue to get better at the rate he got at Syracuse last year for that to happen. So,
yeah, I keep thinking about how I would feel about McCord, and at this stage, not particularly great. Like I just,
also
round 4,
Mike would hate
round 4 pick, but
Mike Tomlin would hate him because of the way he plays. I knew he would not want him to be. Now this is what we would do, but Mike would not like him, I don't think.
So having said all of that, Shayne, like where are you leaning? Because I do agree. Now that you mentioned that, we did trade back. We don't pick again here until 185, and there's likely to be a run on these quarterbacks, at least in real life. Obviously, there could be one left on the simulator, but those guys probably all go in that range. Let's see. Is there somebody we can meet in the middle with of those QB prospects? Like I don't like McCord as much.
Yeah.
You don't like Ewers. Like, do you hate Howard worse than Ewers? Or
no? I think Howard is honestly kind of the best middle ground of those guys that we're talking about. I think
would be good with a Howard middle ground as well.
He has enough athletic talent to like actually move around in the pocket a little bit. He's a big bodied guy. Like I think he has a nice collection of skills. It just I don't think any of them are so good that he's going to be a starter necessarily, right?
Agreed.
Like but again, with this quarterback room, like they need bodies at this point. Like after this year again, they're going to have nobody under contract if they don't draft somebody, right? Like there'll be nobody even on the roster, even just to be a backup in 2026. Like so to me, I think he kind of presents the best combination of things that we're talked about.
I do too, and I again, if he falls in the somewhere between Landry Jones and Mason Rudolph as a backup, you're spending a 4th round pick on it, and you're getting a guy for his whole rookie contract. I think that it's not a high upside swing, but I think that you are getting probably a guy that's going to be QB2 by next year.
Yeah, so I would say so. So we can go Will Howard here then. So then we're going to get our last 2 picks here later in the draft here at 185 and 229. So ironically, of course. They do not like Tyler Shuck at PFF. My goodness.
Apparently.
I mean, Grant, I understand the profile is weird, but it is what it is. So, again, just to recap, so we've taken Derek Harmon at 25 with the trade down, Jalen Royals at pick 83, DJ Giddens with that 3rd round pick we picked up from Houston to add to the running back room, and then Will Howard at pick 123. So we've addressed a lot of the stuff on offense. We addressed interior defensive line. I think for me, you start looking at taking a chance on someone in the secondary, perhaps. You know, tight end's not a need at this point. Maybe you could take a flyer on like an offensive lineman late to just add depth to the class. Like, what direction do you think we should kind of look at here?
Oh man, let's see. Address those biggest needs already. I mean, with one of these last two picks, you would have to think that they what are they doing with swing tackle? Like you got to get a tackle at some point.
That's the
Like
thing, and
to
I'm
me, that's more
curious.
important than safety because you did sign
Yeah,
Thornhill, whether you like him or not. It's somebody for now to hold that position at least. Cornerback, obviously, you could go that route as well.
I think
Yeah, I don't know.
I think the best player on the board at tackle would be Holland Pierce at this point for me.
Yeah, maybe Pierce.
He's just a big, powerful tackle that you hope can maybe at least just be a roadblock, if nothing else, in the situation he has to play. I know some people are actually pretty high on him. Like I wouldn't be shocked if he isn't here at this point, but PFF just doesn't have him very high. I kind of like Tommy Hill, but like he's probably a special teamer. Let's be honest about it at this point. Which at this point, not a bad thing. You're picking a 185, but he's a big physical corner with some ball production in his past. So like that's an interesting one.
Yeah, Pierce is
Anybody?
huge. I mean, I don't know. Like, I mean, I think that would be a great pick at this stage in the draft. It's just
Georgia Xavier
does he
Truss,
does he fit
maybe,
the
but
scheme at all? Of
not
what Steelers are trying to,
really. Not really.
but I do. I mean, I like sometimes I can ignore that to just take a better football player.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, especially this late in the draft. I mean, you could look like it is Xavier Truss, but he's kind of that same style of like big, tall, powerful guy. I would probably
slot corner. You could go a slot corner here as well.
Yeah,
They
I mean,
definitely
if we
need some
just
competition
look at corner, I mean, I'm not really impressed by any. I mean, Jabbar Muhammad has had quite a fall since early in his career, but safety, I don't really think there's anybody that's all that interesting to me. Yeah,
What about off-ball linebacker? Just
that's a good one. Let's
real
just
quick
see what
because
he
I think
has
that
here.
they could add one more player to that room. I
Danny
like
Stutzman.
Stutzman. I like
He
Stutzman.
is if you need a run defender, yeah, I mean,
I
Jamil
like
White Jr. is
Stutzman,
way
but
too low,
I
by the
don't know
way,
if he
but
makes it this far either.
I don't think, and I mean, I would say he definitely. I guess he could because he is, to me, like he is a stiff player that's a run defender. Like, so that's just
reminds me of this.
me. But
Yeah, well, I see some like the Leighton Van Der Esch mold, something like that
gotcha.
guy.
I mean, the aesthetic, absolutely. He definitely has that aesthetic. I'll give you that for sure. But yeah, someone like that could make sense too.
All right. Do you have one direction that you're leaning over another right now?
I think I'd probably, kind of like you said, I think I'd probably just take Pierce. Like I think he at least offers like, again, if he has to play, like he's a guy that some people do like a little bit more than this range, at least that I've seen. And also, he's just a big, just wall of a guy that at least might offer some sort of resistance to pass rushers. And in the run game, yeah, he's not probably going to be a great, blocker in our scheme, but he's going to move people. I feel like, if nothing else. So he could be valuable there. So that's probably where I would land here.
Well, and maybe the Steelers don't care about as much. Obviously, this is our mock and what we're doing anyway.
Right.
But they were interested in Amarius Mims last year. It certainly seemed like it. So yeah, I'd be good with Holland Pierce here as well.
Just get some tackle depth here. Then we have one more pick real late, and let's see what we got here. So, man, that's a collection of guys here. I think at this point. And we haven't touched
corner.
We haven't touched corner or safety at all. So I'm wondering who the best players left here would be.
Yeah, I mean, your guess would be as good as mine at this point. You're throwing a dart and hoping it sticks late in the 7th round like this.
I think, honestly, and this one is not necessarily because I think he's going to be a impact on defense at any point potentially, but safety, specifically Hunter Wooler out of Wisconsin. I like my Wisconsin guys. We know that. Now, he's a guy that is a true like box safety and a guy that's probably more of like a linebacker type, but I think he could be a great special teamer because of the tackling ability and just his feel for the game. And if nothing else, maybe that's long-term replacement as a special teams player and a guy that could play on defense as like a linebacker / safety type of role.
My next Miles Killebrew.
Exactly. Like that exactly is kind of who I think he could be ultimately in the NFL. And I know he's still around right now, but Killebrew can't keep doing it forever, obviously. So that would probably be just the guys I'm looking at here. He's probably the one that I would take. Either that or, again, a Tommy Hill who fall from grace after having a really good, I think it was 2022 or 23 season. But really good ball production, but just not a great athlete. So.
Yeah, I can get behind taking Wooler there. Just for kicks here, Shayne. Go to wide receiver again real quick.
Yeah. If we wanted to double up. So you have the Colorado
if
guys.
there was a double up. Yeah.
Not Kyron Lacey. He's got stuff going on.
So Dante Thornton's going to be gone by this point. He's just too athletic of a profile. Like if that were, he'd be like my perfect like double up type player right there.
I mean, if you just want to go pure speed, Arian Smith.
There you go.
Could be a guy.
No,
too.
I think Wooler would probably make the most sense here. You're getting a player in the secondary. It'd be hard to escape this draft without drafting anybody from the secondary.
Player.
So. At least adding to the safety.
At this point, you're usually looking for either the Dante Thorntons of the world, where it's like this guy's a freak, can't actually play that much yet, but we'll say, or a guy who can make the back end of the roster and be a special teams value. So.
Yep. Reach for the stars, or take a guy that's has the best chance to make the roster, and I think that's what we're doing here. So
with Hunter Wooler. So that will do it. We can show our draft here. Just once it wants to grade us. So. What did they say? We got a whole B. That's bottom 35%. Whatever. No, but just to show everybody here, for those who are audio listeners, we got Derek Harmon again at 25 after the trade down with the Texans. Jalen Rose at 83. DJ Giddens with the Texans third-round pick at 89. Will Howard, quarterback, Ohio State at 123. Holland Pierce to be a potential swing tackle from Rutgers here at pick 185, and rounded out with another Wisconsin guy. I got to add Wisconsin guys when you can, of course. Safety Hunter Wooler out of Wisconsin, more of a special teams player.
All right, Shayne, do you have a favorite value pick out of the ones that we just made there?
I would say, I mean, for me personally, it would be Harmon in the first round just because I have a top 15 grade on him. But overall, probably, man, I mean, I think we did pretty good job of drafting value in general. Probably, I agree with Giddens being an A- here. Like Howard, I don't think is a value. I think he's fine in the fourth round. So, but Giddens is definitely a really good player for the 89th pick in the draft.
Yeah, I would be most excited coming away with this draft with Harmon at 25 and then Giddens in trade back scenario. I think that would be ideal. So let us know your thoughts. If you guys agree with the decisions we made at the draft, you would have done something different. Drop it in the chat down below. Let's get some comments down in the chat. Help us be found here on YouTube. We want to keep bringing you this content all the time. If you enjoyed doing the live walkthrough mock draft, let us know, because we plan to do some predictive mocks coming up here. What would the Steelers do? And as these breadcrumbs continue to unfold here, we're going to have a pretty good idea of where the Steelers could go in the 2025 NFL draft. Thank you all for joining us on the show today. We go live on YouTube every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. Also check out Josh Yorish's show live on Mondays at 1:30 p.m. Thank you for joining us on the show today. You can follow Shayne on X at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on X at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also check us out on YouTube, or ask Alexa to play the Still Curtain Steelers podcast. And thanks again for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.